Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second day of the Public Participation Forum on the Draft Kenya Civil Aviation Regulations 2021. We are glad that you will make time out of your busy schedules to join us, and we can see already we have quite a good number in participation. Today being the second day of the regulations review exercise, we will be having a number of regulations to review, and they will be 5 in number. As we had mentioned yesterday, today we will be going through our aircraft operations regulations, and in the afternoon we will have an opportunity to go through one of our economic regulations. That's the licensing of air services regulations. To start us off, I'll request one of my colleagues, Miss Elizabeth Miss Captain Mary Kai, to lead us in a word of prayer to start off the day.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Let's go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, we come before you in the mighty name of Jesus. Father, we thank you for giving us this day. We commit the day, even as we're going through the regulations together with the stakeholders, that you'll be able to give us wisdom and strength to continue, for everything to go well as planned, and to open our eyes at the places where we can be able to serve the industry better. We pray even for the aviation industry as a whole, not just in Kenya, but also the rest of the world. We thank you and we bless you. So in Jesus' name we pray and believe. Amen.
Okay, thank you very much, Captain, for the opening prayers. Today we will be having, as I had mentioned before, 4 of our aircraft operations regulations. That's operation of draft civil aviation, operation of aircraft commercial air transport, instruments and equipment, operations of aircraft general aviation, and helicopter operations. Due to the hiccups that we experienced yesterday, we will be highlighting some of the proposed changes that we have made to the air operator certification regulations. Air operator certification and administration regulations during the 11:45 to 1 o'clock period. That's when we will be going through the general aviation regulations. During this period, any questions that you may have or any feedback that you may have can also be brought in, and it will be included to the list of proposals that we had received yesterday. So to take us through today's regulations on the operation of aircraft commercial air transport, Captain Kirunda Kiruthi will be taking us through that. Under the instrument and equipment regulations, we will be having Mr. Alois Lumutu taking us through that one. Under general aviation, as well as the helicopter, under general, we will be having Mr. Kirunda Kiruthi. And under helicopter operations, we will have Charles Mutai, who will be taking us through the helicopter operations. I want to take this opportunity to kindly remind you, when it comes to the shifting from one session to the other, we will be having short 5 to 10 minutes breaks to enable us shift from one session to the other. I'd also wish to remind you on the process of logging in on the regulations. Kindly go to the link that is under kcaa.or.ke. Under the events tab, click on the drop down menu and select the session that you would like to join. This will take you directly to the link, to the live event link, so that you won't be seeing the pre-recorded session. So there will be no need to register twice, as we are moving from one session to the other. Now, to help us off, we will be having one of our colleagues, Ms. Elizabeth Kamene, who will be responding to the questions that will be raised under the questions tab. The questions tab is on the top right-hand side of the screen. Type in any of the questions that you may have for the panelists to respond to. Also today, and in order to enable us have an all-inclusive session, we are requesting any participant who intends to make an oral presentation or intends to give any verbal remarks to kindly indicate at the start of the period or even as the period is ongoing. This will enable us determine on how we will schedule the presentations. We want to give as much of you as possible to be able to give your comments today. So under the questions tab, there's a blue button there, ask a new question. Kindly just indicate you intend to make an oral presentation, and the floor will be given to you to address the meeting. One more thing I want to mention, we have received a lot of input in terms of written submissions through the stakeholder participation form. The emails have been coming in to kcas2021@kcaa.or.ke. All these proposals, all these comments have been noted down. They are being collated, and we will be able to present in a tabular format the responses from KCAA, and also be able to share with you the comments that have been taken on board, because as you are aware, the regulations are to enable KCAA and the industry develop the aviation industry while ensuring safety and security is observed at all times. Again, I want to repeat, under the questions tab, kindly indicate that you kindly indicate your interest to give any verbal remarks or any oral presentation, and the floor will be given to you. We want to hear as much of you as possible in order to make this stakeholder participation forum a success. I also want to confirm that our representatives from the Kenya Law Reform Commission will be joining us throughout the stakeholder participation forum, as well as the representatives from the AG's office, who will also be assisting the legal team in terms of capturing any comments and guiding the forum during the remaining 4 days. So before we start off, just a reminder on the shifting from one session to the other. Just go to the KCA registration link. That's under kcaa.or.ke. Under the events tab, click on the drop-down menu and select the session that you intend to join. We will be having 4 sessions: the commercial air transport aeroplane regulations, instrument and equipment, operation of aircraft, helicopter operations, and licensing of air services regulations. And during this period, during the general aviation slot, we will be recapping on the air operator certification and administration regulations. So to start us off through the operation of aircraft, commercial air transport aeroplanes regulations, my colleague Captain Kirunda Kiruthi will be taking us through the regulations. As you are aware, the 4 regulations are a split, and this was also part of what the stakeholders had requested in terms of having regulations that are aimed at particular areas of the industry, such that we've now been able to split the commercial air transport from the general aviation, as well as helicopter operations. We do acknowledge that, and from some of yesterday's remarks, that there is need to better the regulations by having them in parts that address particular types of operators that are in our industry. This we have noted and taken on board, and it will be part of what KCAA will be embarking after we have completed these regulations review exercise. So to start us off, my colleague, Captain Kirunda Kiruthi, will be taking us through the commercial operations regulations. Thank you very much, Bwana Kirunda.
Thank you very much, Dennis, for leading us so well throughout this section. As you have heard, my name is Captain Kirunda Kiruthi, and I will be walking you through the draft civil aviation operations of aircraft for commercial air transport regulations. These are really an improvement from the 2018 regulations. We have done a number of things to enhance meaning on them. The changes were really designed to help comply further with Annex 6. There were a number of provisions that were in the Chicago Convention, Annex 6 to the Chicago Convention, that had not been fully adapted to these regulations, that we have included them on this round. And also we have enhanced some we've added some provisions that will add efficiency to aircraft operations by adapting some best practices from other CAAs. So basically, they are a much better improved version from the 2018 regulations. And in brief, we made a total of about 120 line items changes to them. 30% of the changes were really to address Regulation 2 on interpretation. And you will see as we are walking through the regulations, you'll be able to see most of them. I may not be able to dwell too much on items that are on Regulation 2 on interpretation and definition, because I think we have much other big items that we'll need to focus on. There has been a wider team that has been involved in the background, comprising of a number of SMEs, just different subject matter experts that have been together working behind the scenes to really make sure that these regulations are the best possible set that we could present through this season. And that is the same team that will be sitting back later on to review the comments that will come from the industry to make sure that those comments are very well adapted and ensure that they've adapted to the existing set and after reviewing the best practices in the industry. So without further ado, I believe I will go ahead and get started with sharing the metrics.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we are working on the audio, I trust that my audio is clear. Okay. Our apologies, as we seem to have lost the audio for the presenter. We are working on that, and it will be back very, very soon. Apologies for that. Seems to be a small technical glitch. And is it okay? Is the audio back? I trust that the audio is now back. Apologies for the technical hitch. We will be resuming in a few minutes. The same is being addressed by our ICT technical team. As they are doing that, let me just remind you on the process of switching through the various sessions. Kindly go to the KCAA drop-down KCAA website. You will find the registration portal there. Click on the drop-down menu and join the session that you intend to participate in. And as we are going through, we will be having short 10 minutes breaks between the presentations to enable us switch to the presenters. Also, kindly indicate whether you intend to have any you intend to make any oral presentations, as well as if you intend to address the meeting, you will be given a forum once you indicate the intentions under the questions button. Our team is working on the our technical team is working on the audio, and this should resume in just a few minutes. We are also glad to see that the list of participants is growing, meaning that we trust that we will be having your input, and any person who intends to make any oral presentations, kindly do so by indicating under the questions tab. So just some consultations before we resume the presentation. That's on the draft civil aviation operation of aircraft, commercial air transport aeroplanes, regulations 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, the presentation will be resuming shortly. We apologize for the loss of audio in the middle of the presentation. This is being rectified, and we will be able to continue with the presentation in just a few minutes. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've now fixed the audio issue. We will be resuming very, very shortly. Okay. Bwana Kirunda.
Heard clearly? Can you clearly hear me? All right, thank you. Apologies for that technical hitch. Sometimes we can be always prepared but never over prepared. Anyways, I think I will go ahead and get started again from the beginning for those who may have missed that portion that had commenced. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Captain Kirunda Kiruthi, and I will guide you through the draft civil aviation regulations on operations of aircraft for commercial air transport. I am a flight operations inspector working in the flight operations department. Just a little bit of a brief overview on these regulations. They are an improvement from the 2018 regulations. There were a number of changes that were done to them. The intent of the changes was really surrounding around three main areas. One, we wanted to enhance meaning and allow for easy interpretation. So you'll see that there are some regulations that have been reworded here and there to allow someone to be able to understand them better. Two is there was need to comply on a number of provisions in Annex 6 of the Chicago Convention that were not fully adopted. So those provisions that were not fully adopted, we have adopted them and incorporated to our regulations to ensure that we are compliant with the ICAO standards. And finally, there were changes that were really brought about by the industry to enhance efficiency of our aircraft ops by adapting some of the best practices that we've seen in other CAAs. So there were those changes were totaling to about 120 line items, and most of them, a bulk of them, probably 30% of them, were to address Regulation 2 on interpretation. So there was a lot of meaning that was carried from ICAO and brought to our regulations to enhance the interpretation bit. There was definitely a wider team that was involved in the background that spent quite a bit of time working through them. And it had comprised of a number of subject matter experts from a number of different areas. And that team will still be working through to look at the comments that will come from the industry to make sure that we are adapting as much as possible whatever item that will bring benefit to Kenya and this aviation industry in general. So that gives you a brief overview, and I will go ahead and get started. I will share the metrics of the items that have changed. I will not go into too much detail on simple items on Regulation 2 because those are a bit straightforward. We will try to deliberate more on other provisions that may be more critical to everyone. If you happen to have any questions, by all means, make sure you raise that to us by using the question tab on the chat. And though we have a team that is reviewing them, and also I'll make sure I'll try to address some of those questions towards the end of the presentation. Okay, so on this particular page on the metrics, we have a number of regulations that were on interpretation. Again, most of them were to address typographical errors. Looking at the first one, the safety management did not have spaces, so it was not well legible. That has been changed to what you're seeing on the column of proposed text to safety management systems with spaces. So in a lot of cases, the changes that have been made, you'll be able to see them in color coding form, just to allow you to interpret them well. So like if you look at regulation 2, an aerodrome was spelled out without a space in between, a space has been added. The same in regulation 3, in flight was not spelled correctly, and that has been addressed. If you look at number 4, there were provisions that were not included from the annex, and that is on the word air traffic control. So the meaning was enhanced from looking at the FAA as well as the annex to enhance that meaning. So that has been added to that particular section. Regulation 5 was just a typo on it's not, sorry, line item number 5 on regulation 2 was a typo that was addressed as well. Regulation 6 was on the line item 6, which is still regulation 2, was on the capitalization, where we had a much better meaning for the aircraft tracking. So that had some errors that had been addressed appropriately. Line item 7. The word evaluator had a meaning that was amended appropriately to read: an evaluator means a person employed by an approved training organization or an air operator certificate holder. This is critical mostly when it comes to the cabin crew area. If you look at line item 8, there were again some more typos that went there on an aeroplane. They didn't have the correct spacing. All right. So a lot of the typos, I won't spend too much time on them, as well as different additions that were added. So we'll just skim through them because I think we do not have too much time and we have other critical items that we'd want to spend more time on. On line item 15, there was a meaning of dangerous goods incident that was adjusted to comply with the annex. What was there before did not fully comply, so that was done. Line item 17, there were some text that were added on the operation specifications, just a change in wording to include the line item specific approvals that was not there before. If you look at line item 20, we know that there are some significant changes that have happened to maintenance documents. We used to call this particular document certificate of release to service. It's now called maintenance release. So that was adjusted accordingly to comply with the annex. And also the word maintenance on line item 22 was also reviewed. Again, the meanings were just not in tandem with what the annex was saying, so those were adjusted appropriately. The ask guys to download the presentation. Okay. All right. We have a note here saying that you can download the presentation on the screen on the upper right corner. So if you go to your screen on the upper right corner, you can download this particular presentation. It'll help with the with tracking and following, because sometimes I think looking it through this particular screen, the wording may not be that clear. Maybe you may want to expand it, and that will give you a little bit more maneuverability with the presentation when you download it. So you'll be able to see it on the upper right corner to be able to download. Regulation, line item 25, we updated the meaning of dangerous goods. 26, we updated meaning of the decision height that was not there before. Right. 27, we included the word on flight, on the definition of flight duty period, that we changed it to comply with the annex. Before it had read something that revolves around aeroplane, but now it was adjusted to refer to aircraft so that it can take care of just not the aeroplanes, but even other aircrafts that might be applicable. There were some more meanings that were added, items like state of the aerodrome, contaminated runway, dry runway. These were all not there before, and they've been included. Items like agreement summary, modifications, which are all just adopted from the annex. In item 34, we have a repair that was whose meaning was also updated, and state of design on line item 35. On 36, we had the technical instructions that the meaning was transposed to what was on the annex and is listed. And then line item 37 was on alternate aerodromes. Again, these are all line items that are just transposed from the definitions on the annex. We're all aware the meaning of category 3, cat 3 approaches had been updated. We now do not have the cat 3A, cat 3B, cat 3C, and we just have category 3, whose meaning has now been adapted again to reflect that change in the annex. We also changed the wet runway, which was never there before, and fatigue. Fatigue was also changed to get the exact character that was on the annex, as well as the so that sort of wraps up basically a lot of the items that we changed on regulation 2. As I said, most of them were really typographical errors and just getting more meaning there. If we look at line item 41 on regulation 7.2, there were some typographical errors that were there on that particular one. So like if you look at there, unless there, it just was not spelled correctly, that was updated appropriately. The same as line item 42, regulation 7.4, as well as 43, and that is where the equipment was spelled jointly with and that was rectified. Line item 44, there was a sub-regulation that did not fully comply with the annex, and it was updated accordingly, and that was regulation 38.4, where the updated version was an approach to land shall not be continued below 300 meters, 1,000 feet above aerodrome elevation, unless the pilot in command is satisfied with the runway surface condition information available. The aeroplane performance information indicates that a safe landing can be made. So that was an updated change adapted from the annex. Line item 45 was on regulation 8, aircraft flight manual marking, placard and requirements. There was a provision that was added. This provision was to help ensure that aircrafts are operated in compliance with the operations manual, AFM and POH. It was something that was lacking, and the provision added was on sub-regulation 5, a person shall not operate an aircraft without complying with the procedures and operating limitations specified in sub-regulation 1A, B, C, and D. And if you look at those sub-regulations, really talk about the AFM, POH, operations manual, etc. Line item 46 was on typographical errors on the hazards shall first. That was just updated. And the same happened to line item 47, 48, and 49, which you can see with the color coding, just errors on that were there before that were updated. The same happens to line item 50, 51. 51, if you look at the word certificate was misspelled and maintenance organization was joined, that was also adjusted. And then regulation line item 53 on regulation 45, which is on aerodrome route proficiency. Line item sub-regulation 44.5 was amended to comply with the annex, and basically the annex added a number of line items. I'll read it all. It says an operator shall not continue to utilize a pilot as a PIC on a route or within an area specified by the operator and approved by the authority unless within the preceding 12 months that pilot has made at least one trip as a pilot member of the flight crew or as a check pilot or as an observer on the cockpit within that specific area, and if appropriate on any route where procedures associated with that route or with any aerodrome intended to be used for takeoff or landing require the application of special skills or knowledge. So basically, the items that were added, what you see on the red, and these are items that were just transposed from the annex because there was a gap in that particular area. Line item 54 affected regulation 238 2C. Again, there were some typographical errors where there was the meaning of service was changed corrected to read serve, which is the word that was more appropriate for that. There were some changes that were done on regulation 238, and that is on the authorized instructor regulations. And these changes were to align these regulations with ICAO and also to align with sound. Okay. To align also with references to Doc 10,002, which was in alignment with the establishment of the minimum qualification to serve as a cabin crew instructor. So there were some additional provisions that were added for cabin crew instructor, and these were only about three different provisions that were added to align that with the doc, and I'll just read those particular three of them. So it talks of that cabin crew instructor would need to have E, which has at least 3 years of experience as a cabin crew member. F has successfully completed a cabin crew instructor's training or an equivalent course recognized by the authority, and G have qualifications and experience as a lead or in charge cabin crew member. And this was set to really enhance that area of cabin crew instructors. There has been some gaps that were established, and also the fact that it wasn't fully in compliance with what the doc says. Those changes were brought about by that. Line item 56, regulation 67. That was a small change in the wording where the word pilot in command was omitted from that discussion, from that regulation, and it was re-included to capture again information on the annex. On line item 57, regulation 73, typographical error that was adjusted. 58, regulation 79, there was meaning that was transposed from annex 6, part 1, 4.4.2.1. And the new provision that was added was 79.5. A pilot in command shall report the runway braking action, special air report, air rep, when the runway braking action encountered is not as good as reported. So basically, these are just more provisions added to highlight hazards and allow pilots to report those hazards that are encountered. So issues on braking action were introduced. Line item 59 were on EDTO mostly. These are requirements for operations beyond 60 minutes to an en route alternate aerodrome. There were a lot of changes that were done there, and the whole idea was just to enhance meaning. There was a special team that was dedicated on EDTO, and they added some provisions that were also missing on the annex. Like in this particular one for EDTO line item, this provision 3 added talked about, in addition to the requirements of sub-regulation 109, all operators shall ensure that the following are taken into account and provide the overall level of safety intended by these provisions. And that is the operational control and flight dispatch procedures, operating procedures, and training programs. Basically, that was just an area that allowed anyone who's engaging in these EDTO operations to make sure these 3 particular line items are fully in alignment with the operation targeted. Further on EDTO, there were some changes here again to comply with the annex on regulation 106A, that is line item 60, where that reg was simplified and it was guided with what was outlined in the Annex 6, Part 1, 4.7. And it says 106.1, unless specifically granted an extended diversion time operations EDTO approved by the authority, an air operator certificate AOC holder shall not operate a 2-engined airplane over a route that contains a point further from adequate aerodrome of more than 60 minutes at the 1 engine in operative cruise speed, determined in accordance with sub-regulation 2. So it is much simpler wording than what was listed before. What was there before had so many requirements and a lot of words that really did not add much more meaning to what the context of the reg was said. So that was simplified in that context. Again, line item 62, regulation 106.2, the same was happened. There were some provisions that were deleted and some were updated. There were the 2018 provisions had repeated a number of provisions. These were updated accordingly to enhance meaning. The line item 63 was still on the same EDTO topic. There was a reference to propeller-driven aeroplanes that was changed to reflect piston-powered airplanes. There were some redundancies in line item 64 that were taken out because they were captured in a previous regulation, again, to enhance meaning. There was a reference in line item 65 that was changed to cross-reference appropriately to the correct regulation. Before it was referenced in 99, which is wrong. So the correct citing was done to regulation 106. Line item 66 was also on EDTO. That was a new sub-regulation, which was just transposed from what the annex had outlined. Line item 67, we had regulations 210 4C. There were some redundant words that were removed to enhance meaning. Whatever you see in red was repeated twice. 68 typographical errors that are corrected. Line item 69 on regulation 210.5E6. If you can see what's on yellow, there were two items. There were repeats. Item 5 was repeated twice. That was updated accordingly. Regulation 210 was amended to address some gaps that were caught up from the last ICAO audit that we had, as well as the FAA audit. They were able to spot some gaps. We did not have regulations that adequately address upgrade training. So those are new provisions that were pointed out. There was an AIC that was issued sometime in 2019, and that particular AIC, some of that content was transposed to this particular reg. So the new provisions were 210.7A and B. I will read them. An AOC holder must include in its training program the ground training qualification and experience required of flight crew member before the flight crew member undergoes training for an upgrade to another role, for example, a pilot in command. Initial upgrade ground training curriculum shall include instructions in at least areas covered in sub-regulations 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These instructions shall be applicable to their assigned duties. The level and depth of the instructions in upgrade ground training requirements may vary depending on flight crew members' experience, previous duty, position, and current status in the aircraft for which the training is being conducted. So basically, this is something that was not in the regulations. We know a lot of operations do have upgrade training outlined on their manuals. However, we had to include it on the regulations as it was required to close that gap with ICAO. We also changed a number of titles on regulation on line item 71, 72, and 73. There were some titles that were changed. 210, we rewarded the title to include initial and upgrade aircraft ground training for flight crew. 215, the title read initial and upgrade flight training flight crew member. And 233, the title was changed to recurrent and requalification training and checking for flight crew members, as well as 234, which was in reference to cabin crew members. There was also a gap there in terms of we did not have a regulation that spelled out the requirements for conducting requalification. If someone has been out of the industry for a long time, they haven't been flying, or they haven't participated their role appropriately, there was no particular regulation that advised on how they need to be incorporated back to operations. So these particular regs on requalifications helped address those. Line item 75, there were some typographical errors that were addressed. 76 was on the requalification curriculum that I was mentioning out before. And unfortunately, you may not be able to see it clearly from the screen that I'm showing here. But I believe if you download that information, there is a table there that will be a bit more legible in terms of what is required as far as requalification is concerned. I will try to read what is possible on my screen. The sub-regulations 12A says, an operator shall establish and maintain a requalification curriculum that covers the requirements of requalifying a flight crew member or an instructor who, I believe it says, who has not been flying or who has been out of flying or out of their area of operations for a while. 12B says, the requalification curriculum outlined in Sub-Regulation 12A shall be approved by the authority and contained in the operations manual. C. The minimum content and training hours recommended for requalification training shall be set up in accordance with that particular table that is very minute on this particular screen, but it will be well legible in the regs. It shall have a particular number, so table XX is just something symbolic, and shall be based on the length of time the flight crew member has been unqualified. So basically, the table in a nutshell says that if you have been unqualified for, let's say, 1 year, you haven't been participating in that particular role for 1 year, and you want to come back, it lets you know, what should you do in terms of ground training, how should you handle the flight training portion to get you qualified. I think that was a good one, because I think there's a lot of struggles in the industry where someone has been unqualified and a lot of people are not sure exactly what training should be adapted to allow someone to get back up. So at least this regulation helps spell out and address that particular concern. Line item 77 was on check pilot training. Again, this one was more on driving efficiency in the check pilot program. We do have examiners who are designated from PEL or Annex 1, and a lot of those examiners have undergone some training that is similar to the check pilot training. And we wanted to make sure that training is recognized. So this sub-regulation allows an examiner who has been trained under Annex 1 to omit certain line items that are spelled out in the check pilot program, so that they can only focus on things that they do not know, or things that are relevant to the check pilot program to enhance efficiency. So basically what we're saying is that an examiner will have a special bridging kind of a course to help someone transition from being an examiner in Annex 1 to being a check pilot under Annex 6. So that's what these provisions spell out. I'll go ahead and read it, and that's sub-regulation 236.7a. A check pilot applicant who has undertaken the flight examiner's training requirements in the Civil Aviation Personnel Licensing Regulation shall be deemed to have satisfied the requirements of sub-regulation 2, C, D, E, F, G, H, and 4. B, the check pilot applicant referred to sub-regulation 7A shall be required to complete a bridging course on check pilot duties, functions, and responsibilities applicable regulations and operators' policies and procedures. So basically, it highlights the items that will not be covered on that particular trainings and puts a focus on what really needs to be covered. Line item 78, which affected regulation 251.2. Basically, there was some rewarding that was done on that particular reg to enhance meaning. That was, I believe it would be good to set out, it came out from the industry where there were a lot of concerns on that particular regulation. It was not coming out clearly, so it was adjusted appropriately after consultation with some SMEs from the industry. And I'll just read it. It says, it was around flight fatigue. 2 says, where a rest period is taken by a person at a place which is not within 60 degrees longitudinal from that person's ordinary place of residence, it shall be deemed to be sufficient if it includes a period of 8 hours falling between 2200 and 0800 hours local time as set out in table 8 below. The table is in the regulation. This shall only apply on the first day of rest. Subsequent duties carried out while outside of 60-degree longitudinal area shall only observe the minimum rest in table 8 below. So it was really giving some more meaning on the rest periods encountered when you're traveling outside those longitudinal areas. Line item 80 was an added sub-regulation to comply with an annex on Regulation 107. Says an operator shall ensure that a flight which will an operator shall ensure that a flight will not commence or continue as planned unless it has been ascertained by every reasonable means available that the airspace containing the intended route from the aerodrome of departure to aerodrome of arrival, including the intended takeoff destination and route alternate aerodromes, can be safely used for planned operation. When intending to operate over a near conflict zones, a risk assessment shall be conducted in accordance with the Civil Aviation Safety Management Regulations. So again, those are just provisions to adapt to the annex. Line item 81, touched on Regulation 142. We reworded the text for clarity and ensure that we are also complying with the annex. The word below was added to that particular item. Line item 82, Regulation 92.2. There was also a provision that was in the annex that was added. That was Annex 6 at 4.2.8.5. And the item that was added, I'll just read the whole text. 94.1, before commencing takeoff, a pilot in command shall ensure that the runway visual range or visibility in the takeoff direction of the aircraft is equal to or better than the applicable minimum. 2, for takeoff in low visibility, the authority shall issue a specific approval for the minimum takeoff RVR. That was lacking, which is a requirement that was added. Regulation 118.8, line item 83 was just a typo on the number. Here we switched it from 8 to 6. 109, line item 84, we updated the reference regulation to offer more clarity. So that was changed accordingly. And Regulation 123.2, line item 85, there was a reference that was listed, referred to the wrong reg. So that was changed and updated. The correct one was Regulation 139 on single engine airplanes. And then line item 86, there was a change on the timelines for reporting training. That was changed from 5 working days to 21 working days. And this was to allow at least proper oversight when it comes to evaluation of training programs. So what I did, I'll just read the whole text. To enable adequate supervision of its training and check-in activities, an operator shall forward to the authority at least 21 days prior to the scheduled activity, the dates, location, reporting times, and report of all trainings for which a curriculum is approved in the operator's training program. And there was some more text, but the key word here is that it was changed from 5 working days to 21 to allow for proper planning. Line item 278. This now takes us to the area of fatigue. And basically the fatigue regulations were reviewed. There were a lot of items in the fatigue that, as far as meaning is concerned, were reviewed and adjusted. We did have a section on the fatigue that had definitions. Some of those definitions were not truly applicable to fatigue, like we had things like dangerous goods incidents, things of that nature. And some definitions had actually been defined on the interpretation section of Regulation 2. So there were quite a number of items that were amended here, and also to enhance this particular section of fatigue, and also to make them a little bit more easy to read. There were a lot of sections that include a lot of words and describe some things that were updated to allow someone to actually just understand much better when they're reading through these regulations. These items, some of them were borrowed from FAA, from EASA, from best practices that we saw across the industry to try and adapt them. But the whole goal is just to make it easier to understand and to follow through, because before there were just things that were not truly working effectively. So if we look at okay, I'll attempt to answer the questions once we are done with the presentation, which I just need to finish this portion of fatigue. Regulation, sub-regulation 2, line item 87, sub-regulation 248, there were some meanings that were enhanced. Previously, this section of fatigue used to cater for general aviation for all aircraft operations, but we have now sort of shifted to, we have helicopter operations of aircraft for helicopters for general aviation. So this area had not really been amended to reflect that. So again, there were things that were taken out because they were not particularly relevant in this particular section on commercial air transport. So regulation 243, we updated the meaning of duty period as far as the annex, and also, and it was actually defined here, but we took it to. There was a number of changes that that we took out. Maybe one I need to reference was we introduced a particular term that was probably much better. It helped reduce the number of words that are being used, and that was we had from and of flight crew member as a passenger or non-over by any mode of transportation as required by AOC holder, excluding transportation to and from a suitable area. So basically, it helped because the way our regulations were actually referencing that, they had to really define what that whole deadhead transportation is. So when we added that clause, it helped enhance the meaning. There were items such as approval that were removed from that section, line item 91. 92, items that were like dangerous goods, accident, that were defined there, that were taken out. 93, definition again was not relevant. Line item 94, it talked about, it defined exemptions which were not relevant in that particular context, because if you look at the exemptions were in reference to technical instructions, which are not relevant to the fatigue section. So that was removed from the section. And the same has applied to a number of other items, such as state of origin, line item 95, 96, duty and flight duty period, that was deleted because it was already covered in regulation 2. And line item 97, again, duty period, fatigue, line item 98. Those were all updated and covered in regulation 2, so they were taken out from this particular section. So so that takes us to 99, 100, as well as 101, 101, which were which refers to technical instructions. Again, that was the definition that was wrongly placed, was taken out. Line item 102, we have regulation 248, and this was rewarded and shifted around to be more in line with industry best practices. There was a number of quotes that were obtained from the FAA and the EASA that were adapted to help enhance meaning, and as a result, there were some items that were rewarded. Again, the intent was just to simplify, to ensure that that these portions are much more easy to read and easy to understand and easy to respond to. There were also some provisions. Yeah, so those changes applied to regulations 248, which were rewarded again from EASA and AFAA, and 248.6. There were some ICAO wordings that were not really fully adopted, and those were also incorporated, especially this line item 105, which talks about where the operator adopts prescriptive fatigue management as prescribed in these regulations for parts or all of its operations. The authority may approve, in exceptional circumstances, variations to these regulations on the basis of risk assessments provided by the operator. Approved variations shall be a level of safety equivalent to or better than the achieved than that achieved through the prescriptive fatigue management described herein. So basically, that was a standard in the annex that was not adequately transposed, and that was done accordingly. Also, 249.1, line item 106, for the purpose of managing fatigue-related safety risks, an AOC holder shall establish flight time, flight duty period limitation, rest period requirements that are within the prescriptive fatigue management limits as prescribed in this subpart. Again, that particular text was not clearly outlined in the regulation, so that was transposed from the annex. Okay. All right. We look at provisions 109. Again, the wording was simplified there to make it easier. There were a lot of words that were used previously, and that this one says regulation 249.9, an AOC holder shall include in the operations manual required under the Civil Aviation Air Operator Certificate and Administration regulations for the use and guidance to crew members and flight dispatchers the full particulars of all limits and minimum rest periods required under sub-regulation 1, which may affect those. Again, wording was what was simplified. So there were some items that were deleted because they were just a bit redundant. Like in this particular one, talks about the operator giving access to the authority, access to records, a lot of words, but these are line items that are contained in other portions of the regulations and even in the Civil Aviation Act. So we didn't feel the need to repeat them here. There were two new provisions that were enhanced. Regulation 256, duties of operators to prevent excessive fatigue were enhanced a bit. And also 257, which talked about the responsibilities of the individual pilot, the crew members, as far as fatigue is concerned, because fatigue is a joint responsibility between crew members and the operators, so they all have different shared responsibilities, and those particular regulations 256 and 257 were beefed up to address those particular line items. There are also some changes that were done where the regulation was referencing wrong regs, so those were changed accordingly. Like in this particular case, line item 113, the regulations were referencing 244, 245, but these were changed to 250, 251, basically the correct referencing. Same happened to regulation 114, 114, same happened to regulations 255.2. as well as line item 115, 116 as well. Referencing was what came about. 117, there was some meaning that were not really applicable to commercial air transport. So those were just removed because they were just wordy for no particular reason. And there were some destinations that were removed, again, that are falling in here, aeronautical product. And this line item 120 refers to the items that were rewarded and borrowed and benchmarked from EASA as well as ICAO to help to adapt some good, some best practices. And like in this particular one, an operator of an aircraft to which this regulation applies shall publish duty rosters sufficiently in advance to provide the opportunity for crew members to plan adequate rest, ensure that flight duty periods are planned in a way that enables crew members to remain sufficiently free from fatigue so that they can operate to a satisfactory level of safety under all circumstances, specify reporting times that allow sufficient time for ground duties, take into account the relationship between the frequency and pattern of flight duty periods and rest periods, and give consideration to the cumulative effects of undertaking long duty hours combined with minimum rest periods. Allocate duty patterns which avoid practices that cause a serious disruption of an established sleep work pattern, such as alternating day and night duties. Provide rest periods for sufficient time to enable crew members to overcome the effects of previous duties and to be rested by the start of the flight duty period. Plan recurrent extended recovery rest periods and notify crew members sufficiently in advance. Plan flight duties in order to be completed within the allowable flight duty period, taking into account the time necessary for pre-flight duties and sector and turnaround times. Establish and implement a fatigue management program to ensure that all operators personnel involved in the operation and maintenance of aircraft do not carry out their duties when fatigued, and the program shall address flight and duty times and be included in the operations manual. So again, best practices that are adapted there, and also the last one, which is line item 121, was now items that are in response to the crew members, where crew members shall, report for any flight duty period, rested and prepared to perform his or assigned duties, make optimum use of the opportunities and facilities for rest provided, and plan to use the rest periods appropriately. 2 is an AOC holder shall not assign, and no flight crew member may accept an assignment to flight duty period if the flight crew has reported for flight duty period too fatigued to safely perform his or her assigned duties. An AOC holder shall not permit a flight crew member to continue a flight duty period if the flight crew member has, I believe it was cut off, but it talks of if the flight crew member is too fatigued. So that sort of wraps up this line item 122 is a repeat. So that sort of wraps up the changes that we saw in at a high level. We've tried to cover them so that we can at least put a little bit more effort on answering some of the questions that may come up. And as I mentioned, there's a team that will be working behind the scenes to make sure that whatever comments that are brought up on this forum have been captured, have been adapted accordingly, compared to what are the best practices in the industry, so that we make sure that we come up with the best set of regs that are possible in this particular season. So I think I probably may need to look at some of the questions and see what we may be able to address and answer.
Thank you, Mr. Kirunda, for taking us through the changes and proposed draft civil aviation operation of aircraft, commercial air transport aeroplanes regulations 2021. We have received quite a number of comments and questions that our team will be addressing shortly. But just as they collect the questions, we have a number of people who've requested the floor to participate. So we will be requesting one by one on those who have requested the platform to address the meeting to come on board and give their presentations. We'll start off with Mr. Ali Omar, who had indicated that they would wish to be given the floor to make some comments or give some remarks. Mr. Ali Omar, kindly accept the participation and have the floor. Mr. Ali Omar, you have the floor. Probably your mic might be muted. You have the floor to address the meeting and give us your remarks and comments as our presenters are going through the list of questions that have been asked under the questions tab and preparing the answers for them. Bwana Ali Omar, kindly come on board. Okay, we seem to have lost Bwana Ali Omar. So as our team prepares to go through some of the questions that have been raised, I will be requesting anyone else who would wish to make verbal presentations to kindly indicate so under the questions tab. So we have Bwana Ali Omar back. Kindly proceed with your comments. Okay, we seem to be having some challenges coming from with one of the presenters. Let's move on. Bwana Ali Omar, as you prepare, let's give the floor to Mr. Paul Njoroge to also make some comments. Kindly accept the participation that you've been invited to. You will have the floor to make your presentations. Bwana Paul Njoroge.
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis. I hope you can hear me well. So I just want, I know I had given these remarks and feedback to the to KCA, but just to confirm that they were captured. This is on regulation 108.2 on weather planning minimum. There's a typo that creates a big problem for operators, which is the lowest for non-precision approaches. It says lower, the lower of non-precision approach minimum plus 200 feet per 1,000 meters for circling minimum. That should be slash 1,000 meters. That's been a typo even on the 2018 one. However, I want to talk about regulation 252, and that regulation in itself does not provide for a clarity for cabin crew members in terms of the augmented operation, and it should be clarified because it just says as applicable to the engineers. So I've provided a feedback to KCA. I'm not sure whether there are any questions that you would like to us to answer during this particular presentation. Ideally, we should clearly state what is required for engineers and what is required for the cabin crew. And I hope what we submitted was clear. Lastly, we missed out on some of the areas that we thought would be repeated today. That was on the regulation of AOC and admin. Could you confirm if that will be discussed during today's morning session, or there's another session that will be set out to discuss the issues of AOC and admin that we missed out on yesterday morning presentation? That's it from me, Dennis.
I hope I'm audible. We are having technical issues. Captain Paul Njoroge, thank you for your questions. We did get your input. We did get your input from Kenya Airways, and it's being reviewed. For AOC and admin, it will be handled when we're going through general aviation, which should come at 11:30. So we'll be able to review AOC and admin, then you can be able to ask your questions. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I think I'll go ahead and take some additional comments that were that came about from from a number of operators that submitted, and among them was what I think Kenya Airways submitted, which was very good feedback, especially on that regulation 250 that you mentioned about that did not address cabin crew augmented ops, and you needed clarity. That was captured by the team, and the team will be sitting down reviewing that against industry best practices and see how that can be amended appropriately. There was also an item that came up on regulation 191, and this came from Kenya Airways, where there was a need to amend Regulation 191, where it says that a person shall not commence a takeoff unless the passengers are briefed prior to takeoff in accordance with the air operator certificate holders operations manual procedures on line item F is what was in question on fire extinguisher location and operations. I believe KQ wanted to have the text read that a person shall not commence a takeoff unless the passengers are briefed on the takeoff in accordance with the air operators holders operations manual on procedures on fire extinguisher locations and operations on flight that do not have cabin crew. I believe we may need a bit more clarity exactly on that particular item. I think we were just did not clearly capture whether this meant that for operations that do not that have cabin crew, whether that briefing of fire extinguishers will be done or not. So I believe it may help if you can add some clarity on that particular item. Regulation 108 that you referred to, Captain Paul, that also we may need a bit of clarity as far as whether there is any particular that position. However, the team will actually go ahead and make those changes. But when we have that source document, it really, really helps to speed up that whole process. And I hear Ali Omar is on, and I would let him take the floor for a question that he has. Ali, are you on?
Hello? Am I audible?
Very.
Okay, Kirunda, thank you for the opportunity. And just a few questions. I have a lot of questions because we have, brushed through many things. I would like to start with the issue for cabin crew. The 3 years, in my opinion, is a bit long. It's already taken care of by the issue for the items that the items that supplement the qualifications, and putting that in the regulation is a bit more restrictive. I would propose maybe 1 year, maybe in addition to that 1 year as a passer, then with the relevant training to become a trainer. That would work. Then on my other issue for the 21 days, 21 days is too long. I was thinking also the 5 days is too long, but 5 days is a bit practical. The authority has already approved, has already done all the due diligence to approve the instructors who carry out the trainings in-house. So it's best practice for the operators to enjoy a bit of flexibility in planning of the trainings. You know, a lot of operators who are also unscheduled operators, that is charter operators, don't enjoy the luxury of the scheduled operators. Sometimes you might need to operate in regions outside the country, and sometimes not everything falls to plan. So 3 days would be enough. However, if 3 days is not enough for the authority, then let the 5 days remain. The 5 days can remain, but 21 days is too long for us to plan tentatively. You know, things change without our control. Then on my other issue is the issue for deadhead. It introduces a lot of complications in tracking duty time for such crew, because you need to track. You can't track the duty time, assuming someone comes from his home intending to fly. So you can't track that mode of the mode of transport. Then you have to track the time when the person has repositioned. During that flight time in that aircraft, you'll track that. Then assuming he goes into a hotel room for rest, then you can't track that. It brings a lot of complication in tracking that duty time. It might look easy where you write it on the regulation, but the software bit of the tracking systems to track that brings a lot of complications. And when you say best in the industry practice, I don't know, we need to expound on which industry. Is it the Kenyan industry, the industry which Kenya Airways operates with the EASA and the FAA? Some of these regulations will also bite us. And, until it becomes an issue for us, we need to be managed individually. But when you put a law, then we are all subject to the law in terms of commercial operations. Then my other issue is, just a second. My other issue is on when you put in borrowed from FAA or EASA, you need to clarify on this matter. Is it an issue that is a problem to the industry? Is there a non-conformance in the industry? Is there a safety incident or accident that resulted in some of these borrowed practices you're bringing in? We need to keep the regulation, simple and precise, so that it can allow enough opportunity for everyone to operate within profitable margins. But over compliance is also not too good. I'll rest my case on that. I'm still pasting some of the regulations. I have concerns. We brushed very quickly through. Let me give other people opportunity also. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Omar, for those comments. I wish to invite Evelyn Nzogi to give us her input so that Bwana Kirunda can respond to them. So Evelyn Nzogi, kindly accept the participation, and you will have the floor. Evelyn Nzogi. Evelyn Nzogi, the floor is yours to participate.
Good morning. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Kindly go ahead with your presentation.
Morning. Thank you very much. I was seeking to clarify the rationale on the change of the regulation 215.1 Part 2 for the minimum rest periods. The change from 50 miles to 60 degrees longitudinal. I wanted to query where we pulled this regulation from, because as per my understanding from looking at other regulators as well, the regulations are rather restrictive, so that it can allow for the development of different fatigue risk management programs that cater to different operators and different crew rest requirements. So in my understanding, I would recommend for a stay in the regulation as is until different operators submit fatigue risk management programs that have worked for their crew members, or even more restrictive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Evelyn Nzogi, for those comments. My colleague, Captain Kirunda, will be responding to them. And Phil Ouma, you mentioned that the notification period of 5 days is what you would propose, and the 21 days is rather quite taskful for the operators due to the arrangements that might need to be made and the change of activities. We have noted this, and we will amend the regulation accordingly. So I'll invite Captain Kirunda to respond to the questions by Ms. Nzogi in terms of the rationale for the changes, as well as give a response on what has been some of the questions that have been raised so far. So Captain Kirunda.
Thank you very much, Dennis, and also the Bwana Ali and Madam Evelyn for those wonderful questions. I mean, these forums are supposed to really get your position and an opportunity for you to chip in and address any gaps or any issues that have been spotted. So we really appreciate that participation. So we start off with Ali. You mentioned about the issue of cabin crew, 3 years being too long for someone to have gone to become a cabin crew instructor. I believe this was taken off from the ICAO docs to try and enhance some of the gaps that were seen in that particular area. Because things were not working very nicely from the feedback that we had gotten. So that was where that came from. And I believe the team can also just go review and review it again, but they felt they felt that they needed to have instructors that are a bit seasoned to be able to make some changes. There are some significant changes happening in that area of cabin crew. There is a program that will be rolled out sometime later in the year, and that's the designated cabin crew examiners and evaluators that has not truly taken off. And some of these regs were putting the foundation for effective management of that DCCE program. So, but very good comments. I think the team will also just review them against what we are seeing industry-wide, seeing on how best they could adapt. Dennis has mentioned on the issue of the 21 days training notification. The rationale was to really help everyone, the operator as well as the regulator, to adequately plan for these particular activities, because we did find some operators who would submit, training plans well ahead of time, while there were cases with some that there was a bit of a struggle. So I believe the team has captured that and can go review. There were some other comments that we saw coming in where members were suggesting to have, let's say, 5 days or even 7 days. So all those comments will be captured and reviewed, and the best response the best way to adapt them will be undertaken. On the issue of deadhead transportation, as I mentioned, some of these terminologies was introduced to really enhance meaning, because the issue of deadhead technically is covered in our regulations. It was covered in the 2007 regulations, 2013 regulations, 2018 regulations. So it's something that is there, but if you look at how the wording is a bit complicated, and you cannot be able to truly understand that what it means. Because when someone is traveling as a passenger in an aircraft and is supposed to be participating in flight crew duties, that is considered as duty time. So it's currently captured, and what we have done is add this terminology that will enhance meaning so that someone can read through and quickly capture what it means, which is good, because I think just from that translation you're able to capture what that is. So I think I would also recommend to just go look at those clauses that were deleted that were actually in reference to deadhead transportation, and actually see how even how those have been working out for your team, because it's something that is actually a term that is just introduced to enhance meaning, as opposed to a new requirement that has been put forth. Now, you mentioned again on some of these borrowed practices. Again, the whole idea is we are looking at what industries across the board are currently doing. And I think there are things that we can borrow that will help, obviously, our industry. And a clean example, KQ came up with a proposal to adjust our baggage requirement for passenger aircrafts for carrying cargo. This is not something that had actually been addressed in our current regulations, but looking at what the industry is doing, we are able to adapt some of these regulations that will really enhance efficiency and within our operations. So the whole idea is to really come up with a set that is not necessarily not overburdening, but a set that is really a win-win for everyone. And part of that is actually we are trying to have these stakeholder sections to make sure that that all stakeholders are very well in tandem with the changes, and all their inputs are captured accordingly so that they can be adapted. So some of these practices that you see, they will have specific references as to where that provision came out from, either from the annex or ICAO, or the FAA or IASA. And again, that has been listed there to allow someone to go look at that and see whether that is working for us or not. And if it's not, by all means, you bring it up, and that will be adapted accordingly. So I believe those are the items that Ali brought up. We go to Madam Evelyn. The concern, we do note that concern on clarity on that regulation 251. That particular regulation was not very clear, and when it was looked across the board on other CAAs as well as ICAO, there was nowhere that we could get another CAA that was using that particular regulation in the way that it was listed. So basically, it was adapted by borrowing some text from the FAA to enhance meaning on that particular regulation. By all means, we echo that concern to stay as is. I think it's as we are discussing here, there are more people who will provide comments on that particular reg, and there will be a team that will review against what other CAAs are doing to come up with a best. So I believe those are the ones that we have picked up for Bwana Ali and Madam Evelyn.
Kirunda, can I speak? Back on the meaning of deadhead, it's what is written is not what you have explained, because what is written, it doesn't talk about purpose of duty. It talks about transportation, means transportation of a flight crew member as a passenger or a non-operating flight crew member by any mode of transportation as required by the AOC holder, excluding to and from the suitable accommodation. All time spent in deadhead transportation is duty and is not rest. It doesn't talk about duty. It talks about transportation of this crew, you know, either as a passenger or a non-operating flight crew, and then it generalizes everything and says it's duty. It doesn't say transportation for duty. It says all transportation. Yes. Yeah, so imagine I take a crew. You see, you put it. You need to specify for purposes of duty. If it's not saying for purposes of duty, you know, anyone can say, you know, I can take a crew and put him on an aircraft, apigwe vinywaji, akienda ku position South Sudan, aruki after 2 days. You know, you say hiyo yote ni duty. It's not duty.
Thank you duty very much, Bwana Ali.
You know.
Thank you very much, Bwana Ali, for that clarity. I think that is a good point, but you understand the intent of that was really to address on someone who is participating on duty. So if the meaning has not been brought out by that particular word, the team will review and make sure that it comes out very clearly, so that when someone reads it, there's no doubt as to what it means. So thank you for that clarification.
Then I don't know, Kirunda, I would like to weigh in on the issue of best industry practice. Yeah. So I would like to understand what is the SI unit for best industry practice. When we are not looking at our industry here, we are borrowing from FAA. We don't operate in Europe. You know, we don't fly to Europe. It's only KQ who flies to Europe and America. So, you know, what might work for Kenya Airways doesn't work for us. So again, that's why I'm saying we need to shy away, you know, from these things we are introducing as FAA. You know, let's restrict ourselves to ICAO requirements, you know, and that's what we need to look at. You know, if something is not working for us, the regulation is not meant for the authority. It is meant for the people, the law. And if you put a regulation that becomes a best industry practice for Kenya Airways, is not for us, you know. And some of these terminologies you put, and Dennis, I beg you weigh in on these things. If these terminologies go to a court of law, they are not subjected to aviation lawyers. A lawyer will read it as per what the law says, and a perfect example is the word deadhead. If I don't, if we look at it from an overview, like, the intention is supposed to be safety, but if it is not addressing the nitty gritty, the English language has to be precise. We can't assume the law. Today I'm reading it, tomorrow Kirunda you're reading it, the other day Dennis, who is a lawyer, is reading it, and it hits. It's a double-edged sword. Today you are in KCA, tomorrow you become an operator. So again, and I'm bringing in more comments because I don't want to be rushed. I want an opportunity to be heard, so that even if you deny, and we will forward these comments, that you subjected us to a best industry practice that was only best for Kenya Airways, not for Skyward. So please, tomorrow if I have difficulty in getting an instructor, or someone falls sick and the 21 days is too long, don't blame me if I continue with my training, because we have expressed our concerns. So thank you. Let me look for something else and then we discuss further.
Thank you very much, Bwanari Omar. We take note of your comments, and your input is highly appreciated. We also appreciate the input that is given. As confirmed, we do try and ensure that the standards that are set are, first of all, in conformance with ICAO requirements before anything else. And when we move into industry best practice, as has been noted in one of the comments by Bwana Gad Kamau, that we should adopt the less restrictive versions and allow the industry to build on that. We confirm that that is the intention of KCAA. We do not have any intent to actually restrict the growth of the industry. And as has been put, once best practice is established, we also rely a lot on the experience of our inspectors when they are out there on the ground, as they will be able to determine or review some of the conditions that are on the ground, and that is what translates into our regulations and our industry practice at best. As has been mentioned in the comments, and as I mentioned when we started off the session, we do appreciate the fact that our regulations need to talk more to specific operators within our industry. And as I had mentioned, we will be embarking on that very, very soon, so that we have regulations that address the particular type of operators that we have within our industry, thereby having several parts within our regulations to cover the industry players. Now, some of the questions that have been raised or concerns that have been raised touch on matters on air ambulances, aerial works, and balloon operations. The sentiment expressed is that they are constricted in terms of operations, as they are put directly under commercial operations, which might not fit very well. So as KCA, we confirm that we are embarking on development of standalone regulations that will cover aerial works and air ambulances. And for the balloon operations, we will also be embarking on the same. And we will be calling upon you, especially the players in those particular areas, to assist in the development of the draft regulations, so that the same may suit and be well captured in terms of facilitating growth, while at the same time ensuring safe and secure operation of civil aviation. Now, we have noted most of the questions that have come in. However, I see we are constrained in terms of time. All the questions have been noted as appropriate. In case of any, and our team working on the side will will be responding to the questions that have been raised. And for the proposals that have been received, especially on the time periods, this will also be captured as appropriate within the regulations to facilitate growth of the industry. So ladies and gentlemen, kindly allow me to call for a 10 minutes break before we move into the next regulation, which is a civil aviation instrument and equipment the draft civil aviation instrument and equipment regulations 2021 that will be presented by Mr. Alois Lumutu with the support of the team that is before us today. The questions that are coming in, there is one from Winnie Nafula. I think this is a comment. It's on training and use of a training calendar or matrix. This proposal has been well received and had been mentioned earlier. The same is acceptable with prior notification to the CA of any changes that are taking place. Mr. Isaiah Nyausi, you're seeking clarification as regards to the KSEVAC, MEDEVAC approvals, if this is the appropriate forum. Just stand by one. Can you respond? Okay. Bwana Nyausi, as had been mentioned, this is something that will be addressed, will be reviewed and addressed as appropriate. However, we can just get your comment before we move into the 10 minutes break to facilitate the transition into the instrument and equipment regulations. So, Bwana Nyausi, probably we will take your input. We might not be able to fully respond, but you have the floor to seek the clarification on MEDEVAC operations. Bwana Nyausi, kindly accept the participation and get the floor. Mr. Isaiah Nyausi, kindly accept the participation link and take to the floor before we take a 10-minute break to transition into the instrument and equipment regulations. You have the floor, Bwana Isaiah.
Yes, please. On this matter is that as industry players, we come to cases where we operate in war zones. And then you have a challenge of evacuating someone who has been injured in the war zone. I know there was something with the Geneva Convention about a CASEVAC, and that was done purely by the military. But unfortunately now, as operators, we have a challenge that we have even our own staff injured and we would like to do a CASEVAC. How do we go about it? Are we going to wait for the regulation? Will we be having some provision to help us get this person to the nearest medical assistant? Can you please clarify or you come up with an AIC to address so that we can be able to go on as we wait for the development of the regulation, please? That's my concern.
Okay, thank you very much for the input and for the query on KSEVACs. As you are aware, this is something that we are yet to develop or have in terms of regulations. However, the CAA can be approached at any moment and approvals will be provided on a case-by-case basis upon evaluation and upon evaluation of the particular case and the circumstances. So the authority is ready to evaluate each and every request for a CASEVAC or a MEDEVAC on a case-by-case basis. As we understand, this is not part of the the usual modus operandi. So in this particular case, ladies and gentlemen, I still can see quite a number of comments coming in when it comes to the question and answer periods. With regards to what happens to charter operators to new areas of destinations. But that's a question by Bwana Augustus Mogoi. I believe some of these questions will also be well addressed as we are having our afternoon session on the licensing of air services regulations. We will be able to address some of the questions that are being raised. However, I wish to undertake and confirm that we will be responding to each and every question or concern that has been raised, and the same will be presented in a tabular format showing the justification or rationale or the consideration that went into making any of the remarks or whatever the provisions that found them that eventually ended up in the regulations. So, ladies and gentlemen, kindly allow us to take a 10-minute break. We won't be just hold on. Will we end the session? Will we end the session? Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, kindly allow us to take a 10-minute break to enable us move into the next set of regulations, which is the instrument and equipment being presented by Mr. Alois Mumutu. As for this regulation, you will realize that we do not have a matrix of changes for it. Rather, we have a complete regulation that has been proposed as a draft civil aviation instrument and equipment regulation. The reason for this is that we did go ahead and have a one-stop regulation covering all the areas under instrument and equipment. That's under general operations, helicopter operations, as well as commercial operations. All of them are contained in the draft civil aviation instrument and equipment regulation. We will be going through that we will be taken through that proposed draft regulation by Mr. Alois Lumutu. So for now, and just as a reminder for you to transition into the next session, kindly just go down to the KCAA link under the drop-down menu. Please requests to participate, or just click on the participation for the instrument and equipment regulation, and you will be brought to the live event as opposed to the recording that the recording that we had during the morning session. So, ladies and gentlemen, we request for a 10-minute break, and we'll be back here by 10:23. Thank you very much, and see you in a few minutes.